Hey everybody, Fatman here, and today we're looking at what I feel like is an underrated gem in the sitcom world, Everybody Hates Chris. If you're new here, I've already talked in length about a few sitcoms, namely Malcolm in the Middle and My Name is Earl, links to those videos in the description. I've given each of these sitcoms a sort of distinction unique to themselves. Malcolm in the Middle is my absolute favorite sitcom of all time. My Name is Earl has the best pilot episode of any sitcom that I've ever seen. So then, what about Everybody Hates Chris? Well, in the grand scope of things, I don't think that Everybody Hates Chris is really trying to make any effort to break new ground. And the series isn't as imposing as many of its contemporaries. The show offers a pretty typical slice-of-life outlook, while dealing with grounded and realistic scenarios, never really venturing into anything too absurd or grandiose. Now I hear you asking, well, what about that exactly makes this show stand out? This isn't a very ringing endorsement, Mr. Fatman. Well, due to everything I just mentioned, Everybody Hates Chris winds up having what may very well be the best character work that I have ever seen. Because the show never loses its grip on reality, or its focus on the main family, the characters never venture into being self-parodies as the show goes on. Let's face it, as some shows overstay their welcome, or run out of relatable scenarios to put their characters in, writers can often resort to putting said characters into jarring plot lines that feel very out of touch with what a show began life as. Everybody Hates Chris implements these little flashback, fantasy-esque-like sequences. They can be fantastical in nature, but due to them just being a figment in a character's imagination, they never feel out of place. They also serve to give us a taste of these fantastical elements, without ever ruining anything that was pre-established by the series. Staying laser-focused on the daily lives of its main characters, as well as offering up problems that most of us have dealt with in our personal lives, both from an adolescent and an adult point of view, allows the Rock family to be some of the most interesting, funny, and grounded characters that I have ever seen put to screen. Hey, that rhymed. There are no real overarching plot threads or multi-arc story threads. The show just follows life. The adults go to work, the kids go to school, and somewhere in the middle of all that, this family stands out as a perfect example of a loving, dysfunctional, yet human experience. That may sound off-putting to some, it could sound like nothing really happens, and that the characters never really develop, but I promise you that the opposite is true. The breathing room allotted to this main cast because the series is focused on centering around them as opposed to what's going on around them is what makes it so enjoyable. Sure, in a way, by the end of the first season, you kinda know everything you need to know about the family. They don't really ever take leaps and bounds in developmental character growth, but that doesn't mean they don't change. As Everybody Hates Chris continues to peel back the layers of what makes this cast function, you begin to understand and sympathize with each member of this household more and more. Julius isn't just a hard-working cheap ass, he's a great father with a difficult past. Rochelle isn't just a hot-headed and stern mother. She's a devoted person who desperately wants her children to have a better future. There's a point during the series when the realization occurs that you're not supposed to be getting swept up in the specific plot points of that week's episode, but rather how these characters react to the challenges presented to them by these story beats. This not only adds the aforementioned relatability aspect, but is also super engaging as you watch and root for these characters to succeed. This may sound kinda odd, but watching Everybody Hates Chris is like watching and rooting for your own family. It's incredible how involved the viewer can be made to feel. And that alone is a pretty monumental task for a series like. Everybody Hates Chris is obviously a show focused on a black family. I don't think I'm making any breaking headlines by announcing this. If you couldn't tell just by looking at me, I have no idea what it feels like to grow up as a poor black kid in a dangerous neighborhood. Even though it's a series centered around a black family, it's not inclusive to just black viewers. And the only reason I'm hitting on this point is because this type of integration is super difficult and challenging to pull off. So much of modern media today is obsessed with creating a story or characters specifically tailored to one group of people. And while I don't think most people are purposefully setting out to exclude anyone, the line becomes so blurred as creators and visionaries set out to create an experience that does only speak to one section of people. Everybody Hates Chris does the inverse. While the series is obviously centered around a black family and has scenarios that may speak louder to the black community, it also masterfully has an understanding of what makes us all the same and chooses to focus on that. So that no matter who you are or what you look like, you can watch and relate to the things happening on screen. There's almost more of a focus on class rather than race. And I point this out because it makes the show hit harder without ever feeling like it's ever going out of its way to pander to somebody, as so much modern media does. It's almost difficult to talk about Everybody Hates Chris in a more conventional season-by-season order, due to the more grounded nature of the series, but I'll do my best here. Created by Chris Rock, Skeletor, while you're editing this, please do not put in the clip of him getting slapped like I know you want to right now.
He really got a Chris Rock.
And Ali Leroy. Everybody Hates Chris began its 88-episode 4-season run in September of 2005, ultimately concluding in May of 2009. The series follows Rock's childhood and is loosely based upon his family and upbringing. Without further ado, let's take a trip to Bed-Stuy, Do or Die. This is Everybody Hates Chris. The first season opens with one hell of a pilot. The pilot establishes a lot of mainstays, both as far as characters and gags, but also does a fantastic job of immediately capturing the series' aesthetic. Chris's mother, Rochelle, wants to send him to Corleone Junior High to get a better education. Unfortunately for Chris, Corleone is an all-white school. There, he meets school bully and series nemesis Joey Caruso, expertly portrayed by Travis T. Flory. To say that this show has balls is an understatement. Those who've seen the series know exactly what I'm about to say, but when I first watched this as a preteen, it blew my mind. My eyes popped out of my head and I was like, wait, can they say that? Are they allowed to do that? Surely this was a mistake, right? Chris and Caruso get into a fight, and after the principal breaks it up, Caruso declares, "This isn't over, N-word." And man, I love that Caruso says this. No, wait, no, wait, that didn't come out right. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean that I like that he says, just cut! Man, I love how the series has Caruso establish this scenario. As bold as it is to just come right out and say that word, least of all in a series' pilot episode, there's a strange kind of subtlety to it. Chris doesn't even really react to it. He's not even necessarily offended by it. And that's honestly part of the beauty of it. As a viewer, you still fully feel the impact of what was said without the show having to kind of dive into this sappy Saturday morning special vibe. The interaction itself is only like 10 seconds long before the show just continues on, and I love that. The characters on screen know it's wrong. We, as the viewer, know it's wrong. And because of the way the writers choose to tackle this, you still get that gut punch without the show having to backpedal and be like, did you hear that? They said the no-no word, they said the bad word, did you hear it, did you hear it, did you hear it? For me, it's the acknowledgement from this team that, yes, unfortunately this is a word people say that, when it is said, is often said this casually, cruelly, and pointlessly. They don't need to dress this up, they tell it like it is. After the argument, Chris meets a nerdy little white kid named Phineas, Greg, played by Vincent Martella, and the pair become fast friends. Martella is super charismatic in this role, and I love how he's both like Chris's best friend, but under pressure he'll sell him out at the drop of a dime. I also always get a kick of how he acts like a jealous girlfriend anytime Chris makes a new friend, especially a black one. It's consistently funny stuff. Now I want to shine some light on the crown jewel of this series, and that's the family. Terry Crews as Chris's father, Julius, is a once-in-a-lifetime casting choice. I can name very few actors as consistently talented as Crews, and he's no exception here. He nails it. He strikes this magnificent balance of being this sort of tightwad cheap ass, but he's also consistently shown to be an excellent father and provider. Showcased at the very end of this episode actually via his bedside conversation with Chris. Crews has a sort of gentle giant approach to Julius, but when he needs to be tough, he's freaking tough, man.
What you gonna do? You'll find out what I'm gonna do. You think I'm playing? You in the shower. You think I'm playing? When you watching TV. You think I'm playing? Even in your dreams. Hey! You think I'm playing? It's gonna be alright. You lucky I don't know my daddy.
Oh hey, would you look at that? It's the entire reason I wanted to rewatch the series and make this video in the first place. Tashina Arnold as Chris's mother, Rochelle, gives me life. She may actually be my favorite mother in the history of sitcoms. I can't think of somebody more bombastic, wildly intimidating, and unpredictable. I gave Jamie Presley's Joy a ton of similar praises when I did the My Name is Earl video, but if her and Rochelle ever met up, my money is on Rochelle. I almost struggle to put into words how much I actually enjoy Arnold's performance across every single episode of this series. Every one. She's such a masterclass. Half the time she's out acting everybody in the scene with just her body motions and facial expressions alone. I could legitimately make a top 10 video alone on just my favorite Rochelle performances. But if I have to single out just one right now, I would have to pick her breakdown in the season 4 episode Everybody Hates Tasha. After discovering that Julius is still technically married to another woman, Rochelle completely loses her and goes on this amazingly massive tirade. Not only is this legitimately one of the funniest performances I've ever seen, but she goes through every emotion known to man and a couple new ones she invents on the spot in just like under 3 minutes. The range Arnold puts on display here is so impressive. Between her anger, her frustration, her desperation, her heartache, God, the way she clutches herself and says the "I'm your concubine" line makes me choke on my freaking drink. In short, what do I love about this show? Rochelle. Who's the best character on the show? Rochelle. Who am I madly in love with? Rochelle. Who would I kill someone for? Rochelle. My cameraman is dying and needs an ambulance? Doesn't matter. Rochelle. I love Rochelle. Honestly, I like this performance so much, I'm just gonna play the whole thing here, alright? And you can skip it, but you should watch it. You're gonna watch it, actually. This is my video. I'm gonna roll this clip because you just kind of have to see this to believe how good this is.
Hey, baby.
Why didn't you tell me you were married to someone else?
It was a long time ago. It was a long time before I even met you. I was 17 in Atlantic City, and we were drunk. We got married. 4 days later, we were divorced.
Not according to this. That's crazy, huh? I mean, because how could somebody divorce you unless you're married to them?
This has got to be a mistake.
You know how much a light bulb costs per watt? How can you not know that you have another wife?
I do not have another wife.
Yes, you do! Look! It says so right there! You know what? What I want to know is, if she's your wife, then what am I?
You're my wife!
No! I'm your concubine!
Now moving on to the children, I've always really appreciated how well their acting chops were, considering how relatively young they were when filming for the show was going on. Most child actors need a season or so to really grow into their roles, especially if they're playing more of a supportive role that doesn't give them a ton to do early on. But this is not the case for these kids. Tyler James Williams is bringing his A-game as Chris, and he plays this part very, very well, only getting better and better as the seasons go on. One thing I always found absolutely hilarious, especially early on before Williams' voice breaks, is any moment where Chris has to run for his life and starts screaming his head off. Williams sounds like his life is legitimately in danger. There's such an authenticity to it, I actually start fearing for him myself.
Stop it. Get some help.
Williams is just this great blend of wimpy and nerdy, but ambitious and capable. Imani Hakim as Chris's younger sister Tanya is also a gem. She's admittedly not given a whole lot to do early on, but when they start focusing on giving her her own storylines, she really steps up to the plate. I've read detractors saying she's just the bitch little sister cliche. The series never misleads you or wants you to think otherwise, and Hakim nails this expertly. She's so snarky and rude, she's manipulative and she's mean, but she's not above the law.
I am above the law!
Tanya still catches an ass whooping from time to time, much like her brothers, and while it's not an equal playing field, it is nice to see a character like this have to deal with the consequences of her actions. She gets away with a lot, don't get me wrong, but she's not an invincible character like other bitch little sister types, namely Miranda Cosgrove's Megan from Drake and Josh. Man, now that would have been a crossover. Growing up watching this show, I always wanted to see Megan and Tanya collaborate on something and pull off something devious. But in hindsight, I guess keeping underage girls away from Drake Bell was the right call. Hakeem also sells her reactions insanely well. God, what is it about everybody on this show being able to give a 10 out of 10 performance on literally every level? In this season's Everybody Hates a Part-Time Job, Tanya and Drew engage in a game of dares, and when Tanya gets sick and needs to go to the hospital, I buy her pain 100%. Every single time I watch her performance here, and while she's holding her stomach and whining with those little pained moans, I legitimately feel sorry for this actress. She is really selling it here. And speaking of Drew, I firmly believe that Taquan Richmond is the most capable of all the kid actors, especially in this first season, ironically outshining Chris. He brings a bravado and charm to Drew that's unparalleled by any other character in the series. I've always been fascinated by actors who look like they can play a role in their sleep, but still somehow manage to be fully engaging, and Richmond exemplifies this perfectly. The humor found across this series is also top-notch. If I may give another distinction to Everybody Hates Chris, I think this show has the funniest and most consistent running gags I've ever seen. Julius knowing how much everything costs. Rochelle's 10 dozen recipes for whooping ass, my personal favorite being when she threatens to slap Chris into another nationality. Mr. Omar's use of tragic, Jerome asking to hold $1, Greg running like a sissy whenever he's confronted with Caruso. There are so many quality gags here, and that's just a handful of them. There are plenty more, and I will be laughing my ass off every single time, especially with the Julius and Rochelle stuff. I adore jokes and humor like this, not only for how uniquely funny they are to each respective character, but when the script is flipped on them, they become brand new and take on another meaning. Jerome walking up to Chris and telling him to hold $1. Mr. Omar revealing that he thinks he's dying, and Tanya and Drew being the ones to go tragic. Rochelle flipping the script on Julius and knowing how much everything costs when he starts working for Mr. Omar and starts giving money away like it's nothing. This is what the kids call that good. Not one single time was I ever bored by a reoccurring joke. Instead, being excited for them every time they pop back up, which is something I really can't say for a lot of other sitcoms. It's like Kelso falling off the water tower, but done in 20 different ways, and I'm gonna sit here and laugh every single time. The first season is predictably loaded with great episodes, and I'd like to give a shout out to a few in specific. Namely, Everybody Hates Sausage, Everybody Hates Food Stamps, Everybody Hates Father's Day, and Everybody Hates the Lottery as the prime example of the cream of the crop. Season 2 opens with one of the very, very few mini-arcs that the show actually has, that being Chris wanting to run for class president. In a weird way, the opening few episodes of this season almost feel too grounded. In the grand scheme of things, this doesn't necessarily hurt the series, but it's just a little too mundane. I found myself wanting just a little bit more from the show in these opening episodes. Now, this normally wouldn't be a big deal, but with characters that thrive this well together, I wanted a little less class president shenanigans and just a bit more performance. That all changes though when the ball does get rolling by episode 4 and we get the gem Everybody Hates Malvo. Remember when I talked for like 15 minutes about how great this main cast is? Well, I hope you're ready to do that again for the sidecast, because just about every single one of them knocks it out of the park as well. Ricky Harris as Malvo feels less like they chose an actor for a role, and more like they just followed a guy around in real life and set it to film. He is so natural. I have no idea how Harris does this, but he's absolutely mesmerizing as Malvo every single time he's on screen, which quite frankly needed to be at least like a dozen more times, dude. Malvo is so great. Malvo is so malicious and threatening, but he delivers every single line like he's either going to shoot you or like he's a lost child that you and you alone can help. The duality of this character is perfect. He's like the embodiment of the angel and devil sitting on your shoulder, except he's the devil in both cases. While we're here, we may as well talk about Doc, played by Antonio Fargas. You are probably already sick to death of me saying this in this video, but I could not stop if you paid me. Fargus is yet another fantastic actor that can sell his performance just based on his body movements and facial expressions. He has this sort of exaggerated swagger about him.
Full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
But he's also more than capable of delivering a real gut punch performance. In the season 4 episode Everybody Hates Doc, Chris schemes to break up Doc and his annoying new girlfriend Stacy. And when he eventually succeeds, Doc becomes heartbroken. The emotion Fargus displays here is heart-wrenching and somber. I love how capable all these actors are of making you laugh 1 second and then getting you misty-eyed the next. I'd also love to shout out the next episode, Everybody Hates the Buddy System, for its introduction of Jason Alexander as school principal Mr. Edwards. During a school trip, he pairs Chris and Caruso together and then promptly abandons them, forcing them to work together to find their way back to school. The way these two bounce off each other in this episode is hilarious, and we even get some pretty funny introspective into Caruso's home life. But nothing steals the show more than Alexander's last interaction with Chris at the very end of this episode, when Chris tells him that he didn't learn anything and Caruso still hates him. So what was the point of this exercise? The show is already plentiful with huge laughs, but I legitimately had to pause and collect myself here. Alexander is not the only member of school staff to get huge laughs here though, because Jacqueline Mazzarella as Miss Murillo is comedy gold. Literally, every joke is a hit. Not a single line out of this actress's mouth is a miss. I love how she has this sort of frantic urge to prop Chris up on a pedestal and help him through his school career, but in her aggressively helpful manner, she just comes off as an intolerant bigot who's constantly sprouting racial cliches.
Let's celebrate the day Chris's people finally realized they were emancipated. Happy Juneteenth, Chris.
I have a father.
Oh, I know, Chris. If only your mom knew his name.
I genuinely adore how well the series lampshades this too. Chris becomes acclimated to it, but the second another black person is introduced to Miss Morello, they look at her like she's out of her mind. God, the Rock household, the school, the neighborhood, Everybody Hates Chris just really found a way to nail all these character dynamics and make everyone and everything pop with personality and nuance. Big shout out to Cavante Jackson and Mike Estime as Jerome and Risky respectively, two actors that get huge laughs every time they're on screen too. I know I initially said that this season starts up slow, but momentum quickly ramps up, and we get another smattering of all-time classic episodes, including Everybody Hates Eggs, Everybody Hates Snow Day, Everybody Hates Chain Snatching, and Everybody Hates Gambling. The premiere episode of Season 3 is so odd to me. It has a couple of funny lines, but it's one of the few misses for me across the series. And it's weird because it's the only episode of the show to feature Chris Rock actually appearing on screen. Everybody Hates the Guidance Counselor is just a tonally strange episode. I can't quite put my finger on it. Rock is part of the problem, but he's not the whole pie. To start though, it feels like he's ad-libbing everything. Rock does do narration for every episode of the show, that narration always being peppered throughout an episode. And I'm not saying he's always 100% on point while doing that, but I'd say it's a good 80-20 ratio of funny stuff. The narration is never too distracting or random. Every once in a while a joke does fall flat, but that's mostly due to Rock over-expositing on a situation that's already fairly obvious, instead of adding any kind of new perspective to that situation. Here though, I'm just not sure. It's like he's too fast, like he's too manic, like he's trying to get too many words in. Like, Christ man, maybe slow it down a little bit and try a second reading of some of these lines. The overall message of the episode is done really well, but something about Rock's pacing in this episode just really throws me off. The other, and frankly more egregious miss for me, is the Greg being an astronaut joke. They lean on this gag throughout the entire episode and it's never funny. Frankly, it's bordering on annoying by the time the credits roll, and they don't even do it that often, but it just feels like it's always there. Much like Season 2, the episode selection here isn't always hitting, but I feel like it hits a little bit less often than Season 2 did. Season 2 started slow, but then gradually gained momentum and maintained that momentum. Season 3 is a little more akin to traffic, where it'll start, then it'll stop, then we'll start, then we'll stop. That being said, I do think that the good episodes here, while hitting less frequently, are hitting a little bit harder than season 2. And I'm pleased to say that my enjoyment of the show never tanked because of this, it just stuttered a tiny bit. Everybody hates Caruso, everybody hates Blackie, everybody hates minimum wage, everybody hates Kwanzaa, everybody hates Bad Boys, and everybody hates ex-cons are able to stand toe-to-toe with some of the series' best episodes. Everybody hates The Last Day ends the season and sees Chris and Greg going their separate ways. Chris off to Tatalia High, and Greg off to the Bronx Academy of Science. There's a bittersweet goodbye between the two as Everybody Hates Chris starts to wind down and head into its final season. We open with Everybody Hates Tatalia, and man, this is the cast that just never stops giving. Chris meets his new homeroom teacher, Mr. Thurman, acted wonderfully by Paul Ben Victor. Victor is another actor in a long line of actors on this show that feel completely authentic. He doesn't have the outright racism of some of Chris's other classmates and teachers, nor is he quite as ignorant yet well-meaning as Miss Morello, but he is an obnoxious, intolerant jerk. Victor's is another performance where I watch it and I go, how the hell did someone direct this? The way he moves, how close he leans into the other actors' faces, that weird way he moves his head in opposition to what the rest of his body is doing. Well, he does that weird quirk where he licks his teeth with his tongue. How do you possibly write this kind of acting? Speaking of actors who I have no idea how you write, we meet next door neighbor Tasha's mother, Peaches, in Everybody Hates Cake. Tisha Campbell-Martin is a freaking national treasure, man. She's loud, she's expressive, and full disclosure, I don't even know what the hell she's saying half the time. She's that good. She's also weirdly a great juxtaposition to Victor's role, because while his body and head movements seem to be operating on two different planes of existence, Martin's face, as opposed to what she's saying, are also on two completely different wavelengths. She has this frenzied bipolar energy, and she could be saying something absolutely heinous while having this stunning smile on her face. And again, watching her, I have to ask, how the hell do you possibly give an actor this kind of direction? This just has to be raw, natural talent. You can't really script movement this way. Later this season, the stars align and Peaches winds up dating Malvo, and I've just never seen a more perfectly dysfunctional on-screen couple in my life. I ship this 100%. For the flack I gave the last two seasons about their pacing discourse, I think this final season is the strongest since the first, possibly the strongest season in the show's run. The writing feels a little more consistent here, and the show really finds its footing back to the more character-driven humor of the early episodes, while keeping the actual scenarios happening around the cast pretty grounded for the most part. For me, there's only one true miss this entire season, and it is also my least favorite episode of the entire series. Everybody Hates Homecoming is just, what the man. Chris gets asked to homecoming by a pretty girl named Janice, and he's thrilled. The only stipulation being that he has to meet her family beforehand. Chris enters the family's house when the show suddenly adopts a laugh track. And we are full-blown in the Cosby Show here, Janice's last name even being a misspelling on Huxtable. This goes on for what feels like an eternity. And as weird as it's going to sound, this is far and away the most dated thing in a show set between 1982 and 1987. Top it off with the most ear-grating Cosby impression I have ever heard in my life, with a surrealism that comes off way more awkward than it is funny. You have one hell of a clunker episode. Speaking of surrealism though, there is a scene in this episode where the Rock family sits down to dinner and Chris tells him that a girl asked him to homecoming. And true to character, the family starts speculating on what could possibly be wrong with her if she's asking Chris to homecoming. I will not play this scene here because I don't want this video taken down by YouTube. But I had completely forgotten about this whole interaction, and this was jarring to hear. Don't get me wrong, I was laughing my ass off the entire time. But these days, unless you have the word South and Park in your TV show title, you are not going to hear anybody on TV talk like this. There's also been this loose thread in these opening few episodes about Greg just becoming a bully over at the Bronx Academy. Like, he's nerdy, but amongst nerds, he's like a jock. So he starts to kind of morph into this like violent, tough guy that everybody is terrified of. This leads to Greg getting expelled from the Bronx Academy and joining Chris back at Tatalia High School. And all it takes is one single punch from Caruso to turn Greg back into a skinny nerd. It's just such a great gag. Like, Greg walks in and he looks taller and more built, and Caruso just fucking whaps him, and suddenly he's back to stringy nerd mode. If I were to rattle off all the great episodes found in this season, I would literally list all but 1 or 2 of them, so I'll stick to a hard top 3. This series really does stand head and shoulders above the last 2 seasons, and delivers expertly on the series' foundation. If I could recommend anything from it, take a look at Everybody Hates Fake IDs, Everybody Hates Backtalk, and Everybody Hates Tasha. I think it's time to finally bring this video in for a landing, so let's bring it to the series finale, Everybody Hates the GED. Chris is warned that if he's late to class one more time, he'll have to repeat the 10th grade. After busting his ass and traversing a literal war zone, Mr. Thurman catches Chris in a technicality, and Chris is infuriatingly forced to repeat the 10th grade. Chris then decides to drop out of school and take his GED test. I've read reviews of this episode saying that it never gives off series finale vibes until the closing minutes, but it really doesn't need to. As I've said several times in this review already, this is one of the most focused and grounded shows I have ever seen. For them to come out of the woodwork at the very end and pull out special effects and a light show and an elephant in a circus for their finale would have clashed with the tone established by the rest of the series. This is a simple show with a ton of nuance, and it does not need to beat you over the head with the fact that it's ending. That being said, and I hope I can properly put into words exactly why it made me feel this way, I think the finale is perfect. Honestly, while not the best series finale I've ever seen, I think it's aesthetically perfectly fitting for the type of show that this is. The characters are gathered around a table loudly singing Bon Jovi's Livin' on a Prayer, and yet I found all of this startlingly subtle. Characters are literally screaming at the top of their lungs, and the overall word I can use to describe the vibe here is subtle. To be completely honest, I even got a little bit choked up. There's just something really unique about the pacing and the setup of this scene. We start with Chris sitting alone in a restaurant. He takes out a quarter from his pocket and puts Livin' on a Prayer by Bon Jovi on the jukebox, as he awaits his GED test results, having taken the exam earlier in the episode. The song begins and we pan to a cook pointing over at Chris, offering up an appetizer for a waitress to bring to him. There's a man sitting nearby that Chris makes eye contact with a few times. I have no idea who he is or what his relevance is to the story. Rochelle, Tanya, and Drew walk into the restaurant, joining Chris one by one, each also joining him in song. Julius pulls up to the restaurant and slowly begins to back into a parking spot. As the music quiets down, Julius enters and hands Chris the envelope containing his GED results. Rochelle opens the envelope, and Chris asks, "What's it say?" before the screen cuts to black and the series ends. There is something about this last scene that blows my mind. It weirdly makes me super emotional. It's subtle, it's smart, it's fun, it's tender. It knows when to hit the gas and when to ease up. There's something magnificent about the pacing too. There are a few moving parts here, and the camera knows what to hold on, who to capture, when to cut away from certain characters, and when to focus on someone else. Even the music is super fitting to the scene. I also adore that they don't outright tell you that Chris passes the exam. This is based on Chris Rock's real life story, and obviously we know how that panned out for him. We don't need that hard confirmation that, oh, you passed. That would just take away from what this scene is expertly setting up. At its core, Everybody Hates Chris is one of the most well-written and grounded sitcoms I have ever had the pleasure of viewing. I probably hadn't seen it in its entirety for 6 or 7 years before starting this project, and it was a really nice refresher to be able to relive this show again. The character work is unmatched. If you take away anything from this show, please take away how well written and full of life this cast is. They were an absolute joy to watch and magnificently acted, especially Tashina Arnold and Terry Crews as Julius and Rochelle. There's talks of an animated reboot arriving in the near future dubbed Everybody Still Hates Chris, and while I can't really say I'm excited for it just because I'm struggling to understand what animation could possibly bring to this to make this show better, if it is even half as good as the original show, I will be there with bells on. I can't figure out why everybody hates Chris and everybody loves that dip Raymond, but one thing is for sure, and that is that everybody should love Chris. Especially that absolute embarrassment, Will Smith. Guys, I have been Fatman, and that was Everybody Hates Chris. I'm really happy I got to do this, just because, much like Malcolm, this was a show that I've been watching for years that I always wanted to talk about and didn't really have a platform for. So it was really nice to get this opportunity. This is probably the last live action thing I'm going to look at for a while, as I have a couple of animated shows that I want to look at next. If you enjoyed, subscribe, share this around, hit that stupid little bell to stay up to date on everything. For ZeitgeistOG, I have been Fatman. Fatman here in post, and I just wanted to take a minute to talk about our friend's business, Nagol Samaj by Keisha. Can't open your beer? Need an ashtray? How about a gift for a loved one? Well, Nagol Samaj by Keisha provides handmade products direct to your door. Just look at all these fabulous things. You should definitely go check this out, because everybody already hates Chris. You don't want everybody to hate you. If you're new here, I've talked in length. I guess they're not too different, but I almost said everybody hates Earl. Getting them confused. Well, due to everything I just mentioned, let's face it, as some shows run on and do a thing that they shouldn't do. Line. The adults go to work, the kids go to school. I said that right? Why did that sound wrong out loud? You begin to relate. They're kind of synonyms, I guess we can use something else. You begin to understand and sympathize and the only reason I hit on the series follows Rock's childhood, and as bold as it is to just come right out, and because of the way the writers choose to tackle this, you still get that gut. After the argument, Chris meets a little... I said jealous girlfriend, right? I feel like I said jealous friend. I'm going to do that line one more time just because. Imani Hakim is Chris's younger... Damn it. I can't not pronounce it in the way the Arabic people would pronounce Hakim. It's coming out, and I think it's just going to have to happen. Because I don't think I can control that.
You are who you are. Can't suppress that.
Imani Hakim is... you know what? We're just going to have to do it. I can't... It's also an Arabic last name, and that's just... It's going to happen. Because... wow, what the was that? I have no idea how Harris does this, but he's absolutely mesmerized. Literally every joke is a hit. Not a single word out of this mouth's actress. Wow. But in her aggressively helpful... Peaches, 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 peaches.
I gotta see that movie.
Chris enters the family's house when the show suddenly adopts a lap. Chris enters a and Chris is infuriated.